What's up, you phonies, and how's it going? Welcome to another Blender tutorial. Today we're gonna work on a UFO scene. For whatever reason, I've done my fair share of UFO scenes in the past few months. I don't even know why, I'm not even that into UFOs, but I've done a few, so I figured why don't I make a tutorial about that. For today's video, we are gonna implement a CG UFO. We're gonna make it ourselves from scratch and put it into a real video, and hopefully it's gonna look real. So I just went outside, shot my street, and if you want to use the same footage I'm using so you can follow along step by step, you can download the video in the description below. If you want to use your own video, that's fine with me too. So we are starting here in Blender 3D. So every scene starts usually with a camera and a cube. Mine starts with a camera and my little Miho here. We're not gonna need the camera, just delete the camera for now. And I'm gonna keep my Miho just for scale and shadow references. And you can also keep your little cube for the same reasons. The cube is usually 2 by 2 meters. And let's go from there. The first thing we do is we go to motion tracking. If you don't have it up here like I do, click on the little plus button, VFX and motion tracking, then it's gonna pop up. Once you're here, click on open. This is my video. I open it and you see I can go through it, look at my video, and yeah, this is basically the video. I want the UFO to appear here in the background behind those trees. And you can see there's like trees in the foreground, and that is on purpose because when you have VFX like that, you want to stack it multiple times in different layers. Like for example, if I have my UFO behind those trees and the trees are real, the UFO is going to appear more real because it's like stacked behind real objects. So that's always helpful and something to keep in mind when you composite VFX. We're not going to do that inside of Blender. We're going to do that inside of After Effects, but you can use any compositing software you want. So the first thing we do is set scene frames. That means that our project is exactly the length of our video, which is what we want. After that, click prefetch. That's gonna render our video so we can watch it smoothly. Now we're gonna go to our very first frame, go and track. Under tracking settings, there's a few different options. Usually blurry footage works best for me. Under here you can pick different settings. I usually go with location, that works best for me. I hit normalize, and now in the very first frame we click on detect features. This is gonna make automatically a bunch of keyframes, and from the get-go I'm going to delete the ones in the trees because those are not going to be tracked very well, so I'm just going to delete those. The ground ones are most important. In the end, we need 8 good tracking markers, keep that in mind. So now when we hit A, we select them all and track forward. We can see we had a very solid track. Let's click on solve. I usually use keyframe, focal length and optical center. And let's solve camera motion. So from the start we have a solve error of 2.53, which is not terrible, but in order to get a good track you want to keep this number as little as possible, preferably under 1 pixel. In order to get there, we have to delete the tracks which don't work that well. So we're gonna go to our graph editor here and look at the graphs here which kind of don't do what the other ones do. Like this one, it's peeking out, so I'm gonna delete that one. And this one is doing funny things. This one is a bad boy. This one is kind of funny. Weirdo, idiot. And now I'm just gonna go through the scene and delete the keyframes which I think look funny. If we think we did a good job, let's solve camera motion again. It got already better. Solve error of 1.97. This blue graph here tells us how good our solve is. If we see spikes like that, like here, we see, okay, something is off in this direction. So I'm just gonna delete trackers here. And again, we need 8 good tracks in the end. Let's solve it again. If we deleted too many, it's always a great idea to go to the very last frame, go back to track, and on the very last frame, we're gonna detect features again, and now we're gonna track backwards. I can already see a few trackers, they don't do what they're supposed to. Now we're gonna delete the keyframes where we see from the get-go that there are no good. We want those to be as even as possible. And we're getting closer. Solve error of 1.82. Let's just keep deleting until we have something good. 1.6. We're getting closer. Sometimes it's just one of those markers which is doing funny things, we didn't see it, and that ruins the entire solve error. So just keep deleting. Just keep in mind you need 8 in the end. Great. Now we have a solve error of 0.62, which is perfectly fine for what we're doing here. When we look throughout our scene, this is all the tracking markers we have right now. The problem with that is we don't have any tracking markers on the ground, and we're gonna need at least 3. So I'm gonna place them manually so I can tell the software which ones are the ground. With Control, left click, we can set our own markers. And now I'm just gonna track those 3. Now I'm just gonna check those 3 if they do what they're supposed to be doing, and looks good. Now self the camera one more time. Great. 0.61. Okay, the next step is we set the scene as the background and set up tracking scene. Now we can see on the top right layer viewport that we see all those tracking markers floating in the air, which is awesome. This is what we want. When we hover over here, hit 0, now we're looking through the camera, and we can see our 3D models already move the way the camera moves, which is perfect. Well, not quite perfect because obviously the orientation is not right. So now we click on this one, set origin. So our origin is right here where this guy is. Now we're gonna select our 3 on the ground with shift, hold shift and click on those 3, and we click on floor. Now our ground is where it belongs. So since this is our origin here, we're gonna select those 2, and this is gonna be our x-axis because it's going Y into the deep and X left and right, and Z is gonna up and down. Wonderful, we're done with the tracking, and that's really the most tedious part, but this has to be done properly, otherwise it just doesn't look that good in the end. We go back to our layout. On top, I'm gonna hit 0, so we're looking through my camera. This is our ground. Let's move the grounds to our foreground selection here. We don't need the light. Select the light, hit X to delete it. We don't need the background. Great. Now I'm gonna rotate my objects here with R. Now I hit Z, so I can only rotate it on the Z axis. Amazing. On the bottom layer here, this one you don't want to move because if you move, you destroy your track. So Control Z. You can deselect this here, camera to view. It's under the view options here. If you don't see those, hit N. I'm gonna pop out, click on view and camera to view, turn this off. So now when I zoom in and out, it doesn't change. I can just zoom in closer if I want to. So this is my ground now. I can make it bigger. You can just make it as big as you want because it doesn't really matter. Amazing. Now it's time to make our UFO. I'm gonna keep my little Mihao here, but we only gonna need him later. So with Shift A, we could start with any of those meshes, but let's start with a icosphere. And on this settings here, before you click away, you can turn up the subdivisions. So it's basically a circle. So now we have a sphere. Now let's go to edit mode. Click on object mode, edit mode. So you can also do that with tab. We're gonna bring it up a little, and now we're gonna model our UFO. I hit S and Z to scale it down on the Z axis, because that would already be a good UFO. But we can also, of course, manipulate it a little more. When you hit the question mark on your keyboard, you can isolate your object, so you don't see anything else anymore, just your object, which is very cool. So now we can manipulate a few of those things individually. So without getting too much into modeling, I'll just, let's say, move this part a little up. So from the bottom, it's going to be a little more interesting. Now, when you think you're done, hit shade smooth, and let's say this is our UFO now. Now, when we go on our shader editor, we can give it a new material. UFOs, they're usually like kind of gray, silverish, so we're gonna crank up the metallic. Looks nice already. Can make it a little darker. I'm gonna make a noise texture and see if we can get it a little more interesting that way. That's what our noise texture does. So make it something weird like this. And now when we go into roughness, we already have some kind of cool shape here. So now when we look at our scene in cycles, it's very dark because we don't have any lights, but I did a reference video so I could see where the sun is actually coming from, and based on this video I can set my own sun. So Shift A, light, sun, and the sun is coming basically from behind it. We can see where the shadows go when we mute our ground here. The shadow go towards the camera a little and to the left. In order to see the actual video in cycles, that's what you have to do. Go on your render properties, scroll down to film, and turn on transparent. So now we can see the shadows of our CG scene and also the video itself. Right now the video is transparent, but you can change that. Click on your camera, then go to the camera settings, and under Passepartout you can turn it up. Then you don't see anything outside the camera anymore. But also go to your actual video, you see this is your background image, and turn the opacity up. And now I can turn the light source in whatever direction I think is right. On our little Mihao here, you can see it a little better because he's standing on the ground. That's good. Now I'm going to use an HDRI to light up the entire scene. Go to my world settings so I can adjust the HDRI a little. Go down with the strength, adjust our sun, crank it up, because I want those shadows to really look like the real shadows here. Don't worry about the color so much because this is something I usually do in After Effects and compositing. But you can try to adjust your HDRI that this is the kind of shadow you're going to have, but this is not necessary. So I just try to light my Mihao the way everything else looks. Like his white shirt should kind of look like this white here. And the shadow, this shadow should be just as dark as this shadow. And also the softness. When you adjust the angle of the sun, you can make the shadow softer or harsher. Amazing. Now let's have a look at our little UFO. Obviously we need it to be way bigger, so I'll just scale it way up. Before we do that, because we adjusted the position in edit mode, we need to bring the origin back. So object, set origin, origin to geometry. Now when I scale it up, it scales up around the geometry. And scale it way up. Keep it close to our Mihao here or to whatever reference object you have, so you kind of have an idea of the scale. Is this the size of the UFO you want, or do you want it bigger or smaller? That's totally up to you. I'll make it bigger. If you adjust it in object mode, you want to apply the scale. Control A and apply the scale. Amazing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to Shift A and I'm going to make an empty, a cube. I'm going to bring this cube around the size of my UFO, and I'm going to parent my UFO to my empty. Control P, object, and now when I move my empty, I'm also going to move my UFO, which is going to be helpful in a second. Now I click on my UFO because I want it to turn, because that's what UFOs do supposedly. I want to turn it around the Z-axis. So I'll go to item, hover over rotation, hit I, go to the very last frame and rotate it, let's say 360 degrees. So it's whole turn. It might be too fast, but we'll see. Go on hover over rotation again, hit I again. Now we see we have this blue curve here. We don't want it to be a curve, we want it to be linear. So now when we just look at this, this is how it's turning now. You can see it here too, pretty cool. And now with our empty here, we're going to bring this empty up. On the bottom view here, I'm going to go to top view and bring it into the direction where I want it to come from, which is the distance here. Above the houses, bring it up. So it could be coming from, let's say, here and flying this way and maybe past the camera. Okay, so I'm going to go to my frame number 1, bring this to wherever I want it to be. Let's say here, a little higher. So I want it to appear behind those houses and maybe fly to the left. So frame number 1, there we go. Again, we go to location, hover over location, hit I. Now we're going to go to the last frame and have it fly towards the camera, let's say here. And now we hover over location again, I, hover over our graph editor, hit T, linear. Now it's gonna fly from back there, passing the camera. So in compositing, I think I'm gonna have it be behind those trees, but in front of those trees. So I think that's gonna be pretty cool to push to layer the effect, and it's gonna look great. I'm gonna adjust the last frame a little. Okay, amazing. Now we don't need our Michal anymore. I'm just gonna deselect it from everything. And if we like our scene, let's go to render properties, adjust our settings. Since it's just a tutorial, it doesn't have to look perfect. I'm gonna turn up the noise threshold to 1. Max samples, I'm gonna divide this by 4. That should be enough. Under light paths, we don't have any volume. We don't really have transparency. I'm just gonna keep 1. I think we do need a little transparency for the shadows. Transmission, glossy, okay, I'm gonna keep all those at 2. I'm gonna turn on motion blur. Since this is an iPhone video, we don't really need depth of field. So I'm not gonna turn that on. And all the rest, we're gonna do in After Effects once this is rendered, but that could take an hour or 2. So we're gonna go to our output properties, and this is our frames. That's what we want. One more thing we need to do is we have to check our output settings. So we're gonna go to the folder where we want to render to. In my case, it's here. Gonna make a new folder, render, accept, and we have to do a little thing, one little thing in our composite software. So what we want is basically render out not the video. We don't need the video. We only need the CG UFO and the CG shadow separate, because we want to adjust those colors separately. So we don't need all this. We're gonna deselect that. The viewer is fine. We're gonna make a file output node, and that's where our video goes, the CG video. But when we click on the node, go on node properties, we can also make another output, add output, call this shadow. To actually have a shadow here, we need to go to our view layer properties and have the shadow catcher separate, and this is our shadow catcher. Plug this into shadow. Here it's important to render an RGBA. The A stands for alpha, so we have transparent background. In under color depth, just use 16. Now when you hit render animation, or Control F12, then you're gonna render the animation. Here you can see the difference. This is our just the CG UFO. This is our shadows. Since we don't see any shadows here, it's just a blank image. We are rendering an image sequence right now, so we're gonna get all those frame by frame. And once it's done, which is gonna take a few hours because every frame takes around 36 seconds to render. We have 258 frames to render, so that means it's gonna take around a little over 3 hours to render. So after that's done, I'm gonna show you in After Effects how you can composite it. It looks real. And the render is finished. Finally, 3 hours later, we finally can continue in After Effects. So this is what After Effects looks like when we open it. The first thing we do is import our video. We need this as our background. Once we have it, drag and drop it on new composition. So that's our new composition now. Next step is double click here and import the CG sequence. We need to import our image and shadow separately. So first we go in our image, make sure PNG sequence is activated here, and import. Now double click again, go down to our shadows and do the same thing again. Now when you look closely, this is our video, this is our frame rate. It's not exactly 30 frames per second, it's 29.999 something. When you click on this thing here, this pops up. We're gonna copy this number and paste it under the shadow, hit OK, and our image. Nice. So everything is gonna be flawless and at the same time. If this number is wrong, nothing is gonna match anymore. Okay, we have our video down here already. Now on top of that, we bring up our shadow, and on top of that, we bring our image. As you can see, the shadow doesn't look like much. Let's change the mode to multiply. Now I told you guys we want the UFO to appear behind those houses, behind those trees, and appear right on this side and then past the camera. The way we're going to do that is we're going to copy paste our video with Shift D, bring it to the top. Now we need to key all this out. The best way to do that is, since it's a blue sky, we can just use a blue screen effect. So we go to Effect, Keying, and Key Light 1.2. Now under here, we're going to select our sky somewhere between this blue here and the white here, somewhere in the middle. Let's say this. Let's go to our screen matte settings. Here we can adjust our black and white mask. But we can already see that our UFO appears behind our trees, but we need to refine the matte to have it perfect. The way we're going to do that is we duplicate our green screen layer, we remove the effect from the bottom layer, the key point, the key light effect. Now we're going to use the bottom layer, the track matte, on the top layer. And now on the top layer, we're not going to use the final result, we're going to use screen matte, just like with any other green screen effect. So now we can turn it back on and crunch the contrast even more. Increase the softness a little, shrink it a little, make blacks harder, whites harder. Now when we turn it off, it's almost good. We're getting closer. It's already behind the tree, which is good. The issue here is we're working with iPhone footage, and it's always more difficult to adjust iPhone footage when it comes to green screen, or blue screen in that case, but we're gonna get there eventually. If the blue screen effect gives you trouble, just like in my case, you can also rotoscope it roughly and then just key out the rest if necessary. Okay, now that it's rotoscope, we can see the edges are not very refined, but it definitely works better than the keyer. That means we can just adjust those edges here and that should do the trick. So it's mostly behind all those trees where the rotoscope didn't work properly. So now I'm just going to use one of those colors here and key those out on this layer. Great, that's good enough. So again, if that was too confusing, in the beginning I tried to key the sky, which didn't work because I shot this with an iPhone, and iPhone doesn't work that well with green screen effects. Then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna rotoscope those things, like the trees and the house and this tree. I'm gonna rotoscope that manually. I did that with the roto brush tool, and on top of that I used a linear color key effect to key out all those here. When you zoom in close, you see it's not perfect, but you can obviously adjust those things until it is perfect. And now it's time to color grade our UFO, because it's not the proper colors. You can see those vehicles here, even though the material is very similar, is more washed out than our UFO, so we have to adjust that. Let's take a look on what our shadow is doing. I don't believe that our shadow is actually necessary here, because our UFO is so far away from our ground that we can't even see a shadow on the ground. But let's pretend you could see the shadow. What you would do is right click on your shadow layer, Effect, Color Correction, Curves. Now we're going to bring the whites up until when you turn it on and off, you can't see a difference anymore, just till then. The blacks have to stay where they are. Great. Yes, I can see a shadow here in the background, but it's not supposed to be there, so that's what you would do. And of course adjust the colors. If it's, in that case it's very blue, I would bring the blues up and whatnot, but we don't have to do none of that because we can't even see our shadow in that case, so don't worry about it. What we do need to do is we go on our image, right click, and we use the same effect we used before, and we see our footage is way more washed out, especially here on the left, than our CG. So we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna bring the brights up, the highlights. I'm trying to look for a reference because it's very dark under here, and I want to see how dark is it actually, because there is a little bounce, but the vehicle is pretty far away. I don't think we have to worry about it too much, but that looks good. Another cool trick is You select your image, hit T, and go a little down with your opacity. Not too much, because now you can see that it's too transparent, but it's something like around 97. So it takes like the colors a little from the background image. Almost looks like reflections. But again, don't go too crazy here, just a little bit. That already helps. Let's go in the blues, bring the blues up a little. In that case, let's bring the reds down. Yeah, that already looks better. And when it comes to CG like this, what I always like to do is I like to bring noise on top of everything. This is just a noise layer. As you can see, it's just digital noise, or in that case film noise. Bring that on overlay and bring that on everything. So all the layers, they kind of match better. What I also like to do, since there's a flare basically in the camera, that's why this is a little washed out, I like to do that also on my CG here. The easiest way to do that is make a solid, make it white, draw a mask. I'll just make a circle, bring this somewhere here. I know it must look funny what I'm doing here, but it does make sense. Feather it a lot with the mode go on screen. And now we can adjust it by having a little less of that, but that already brings the footage better together, you can see. And one last thing, if you do have it, I like to bring another solid here, use Video Copilot's optical flare, right click, Video Copilot, optical flares, and under options, under texture image, I use dirty. Actually, I don't want anything else, I just want the lens to be dirty. Set this also to screen, and now I have lens dirt in the shot, which also brings the shot better together. If you don't have optical flares, don't worry, just go on Google, type in lens dirt and just download anything with a black background, set it to screen, put it on your shot, and already it brings the footage better together. And one more little trick, what you can do, make another layer, a null object. Select everything, and under parenting, parent everything to your null object, and on the null object hit P, that opens up the position, hold Alt, click on the stopwatch, type in wiggle, let's say 2,20 as an example. Now the entire shot, you can see it on the edge here very well. Now the entire shot is going to wiggle a little, which is very helpful to, you know, add a little more motion blur. You do that by selecting just a video and the video and your image and this video, and turn on motion blur for that. These three actually don't have to be part of it or shouldn't be part of it, so hit on none. So only the bottom three layers are parented to your null object, so it's all moving. It's a little extra camera shake, which is a nice touch. And if you're extra fancy, you can do the same thing with the rotation, but don't go too crazy there. Wiggle 1,1, and very important, because now the camera is moving, or like the image is moving, you're gonna lose information at the edges here. You see that? So just scale up your null object by 5% or so. That's gonna fix it. And that's it with this effect. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and see you in the next video. Oh, and by the way, if you make your own UFOs, send it to me on Instagram or tag me on Instagram when you upload them. I want to see them. Thank you, and see you in the next video. Toodaloo.